Fantastic. Okay. Well, thanks, Sarah, Julie, for being my wing people for today. Really appreciate the support for today's webinar. So welcome one and all. My name is Gemma Todd. I am the Senior HR Consultant for Kingswood Group. Kingswood Group, if you don't know, is a specialist HR, finance and office recruitment and HR consultancy organisation based out here in Essex, but we have clients located across UK and Europe. We were established in 2014 and we've built a reputation for quality services and solutions across both recruitment and human resources. This webinar is the second in a series scheduled by the group for 22-23 and has been created to stimulate thoughts, to challenge perceptions and provide some clear guidance on why replacing the old retributive, combative, negative grievance processes with a restorative, collaborative, positive resolution one makes not just good people sense, but also good business sense too. Now, some of you may already be very familiar with the use of alternative dispute resolution, but sadly, ineffective grievance procedures still seem to dominate in most organisations. Today, we're going to look at how the use of the grievance process to address workplace complaints, concerns and conflicts has become something of a blight in business today, costing time, money and energy that could be better spent on making businesses truly great places to work. We're going to be addressing a number of matters, but in particular one that comes up fairly frequently when I'm talking about resolution as an alternative to grievance of, is it legal? We're going to look at the benefits and hopefully plant a seed of change about how to go forward with a new approach to resolving workplace issues. So as you can imagine, resolution in the workplace is a huge topic and one that more and more businesses are looking to introduce. It's never more relevant than now when businesses are having to be more progressive and forward thinking in their approaches to people management to attract and retain the best talent in a fiercely competitive market. Many organisations, such as banks and building societies and NH trusts, have already embraced workplace mediation and resolution as the antidote to the old adversarial and counterproductive grievance cultures that used to prevail. But it's not just large organisations that embrace this. Smaller, medium-sized enterprises too are also seeing the benefit of addressing their people challenges relating to the 3 C's of complaints, concerns and conflicts through a resolution lens. Today, we're going to look at covering 4 of the key aspects of resolution in the workplace: the causes of the complaints, concerns and conflicts, the 3 C's, the financial impact of those 3 C's on business, how a resolution policy could replace a grievance policy, and the benefits to businesses who do adopt such a policy around a resolution. There is a chat facility for you to write down any questions, which my colleagues Sarah and Julie will be monitoring while I'm presenting. Unfortunately, I can't see the chat, otherwise I would respond directly myself. You are going to be kept on mute whilst the webinar is in session, just really so that we can plough through the information, but we will open the mics up afterwards for questions and answers. And if you could just use the raise hand option if you do have a question to ask, so that Julie and Sarah can more easily spot you and come to you with your question. We'll also share some useful websites and resources at the end of the presentation, which are yours to take away and hopefully will provide some interesting reading. And the recording of the session today will be shared with everyone after the event. So let's have a think about it and move on. Let's talk about resolution. So the 3 C's are really a part of everyday life. This isn't something revolutionary. Everybody knows that they exist, both inside and outside the workplace. And it's unrealistic to think that in every business in the UK, there will always be harmony and unity amongst the workforce. The workplace can be an amazing environment to be in, where we can experience great friendships, develop trust, enjoy deep respect for our fellow workmates. But conversely, it's also a place where we can feel annoyed, misunderstood, disrespected and powerless. And if not addressed, even small matters can become amplified, leading to situations at work which are destructive or deeply unsettling and upsetting for all. In the chat box, I'd like you to do something for me, please. Could you just drop in the words or phrases or short expressions that spring to mind when drawing on your memory of either managing a grievance, being the subject of a grievance, or just your experience of grievance from some other perspective? If you could just drop those in now, and if Julie, Sarah, you could just call out some of the words that are being shared or the expressions that are being shared.
Yeah, sure. Stressful for everyone involved.
Mm-hmm.
Unfair. Obstinate. Time consuming.
Yeah.
Avoidable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Skewed in favour of the company.
Mm-hmm.
Lack of communications.
Okay.
I'll put one in. Frustrating.
Frustrating. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
suicidal
I mean,
thoughts
please.
from.
Gosh.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean,
from the employee.
All of these words and the expressions. Thank you for those that contributed that. That there's nothing really to suggest in any of those words or expressions that the process of raising or managing a grievance adds value, makes people feel listened to, or actually resolves the underlying causes of the disharmony. The words are incredibly negative. Sometimes when I'm running these sessions, I'll hear words like it causes, I feel anxious, or it induces fear, or it feels pointless, or it's a paper exercise. So if these words are reflective of how we feel about grievance, is it any surprise that grievance doesn't really work as a means of resolving those 3 C's of conflict, concerns, and complaints in the workplace? The negative effects and impacts of grievance management go far beyond the time and cost of managing them. There are also the hidden and sometimes not so hidden impacts, such as on the health, the well-being, productivity, retention, and sickness absence for those affected. And again, not just the immediate parties, but the wider working community, and sometimes even the customers or service users for that business. As someone who used to work in a service industry, I saw firsthand how the fallout from a workplace grievance could affect service users. So why is that? Let's have a look at the associated words for grievances set out in the thesaurus. Words like injustice, wrong, injury, offence, unfairness, damage, indignity, resentment, bitterness. Well, you get the picture. When you think about what triggers people to raise a grievance, a complaint or a concern or a conflict, surely we should be looking to words that are more healing, such as resolution, settlement, clarity, purposefulness, positive words which are reflective of the nature of resolution. When we're talking about introducing a resolution approach to workplace disputes, we're actively seeking to resolve those 3 C's. The whole approach is different, therefore the outcome is different. Resolve provides a shorthand for adopting a resolution approach in place of the old grievance route. Respect, showing it to each other inside the resolution solution and after its completion leads to better working relationships. Empathy, and having empathy with the other person's point of view and not seeing them as the enemy, is critical if you're going to find a shared resolution platform. Sharing stories, sharing space and dialogue and solutions, and ultimately positive outcomes. Being objective, taking the subjective guesswork out of what has led to the dispute in the first place, avoiding assumptions and wrong speak about the cause of a dispute, and avoiding the name, blame, and shame. We say we listen all the time, but do we really listen? Are we so busy formulating our next sentence or our next counter to what somebody is saying whilst they are still speaking that we've actually switched off the listening ability? So by giving protected talking space and time inside a resolution solution also gives protected listening time and space. Validating and valuing people. When we are listened to, when we can share our story about what's happened to us and the impact, we feel validated. Having somebody express understanding makes us feel valued. And being enabling and empowering. The solution is not a sanction or a punishment. It's a shared agreement that's contributed to by all with a commitment from all to making it work. Resolving 3 C's via the informal, via informal and facilitated conversations, individual or group mediations has more power to engender lasting and successful dispute resolution in the workplace than a formal grievance ever could. But back to this thorny subject of, is it legal? Won't we get in trouble if we don't have a grievance procedure to follow when a workplace dispute arises? Well, in short, the answer is no. But to understand that statement, which is very easy for me to sit here and make, we need to go back a few years. So way back in 2007, and some of you may, who are HR team members and others may recall this, but in 2007, Michael Gibbons, who'd previously been the chair of the CBI, was tasked with conducting an independent review for the Department for Trade and Industry on the subject of employment dispute resolution in Great Britain. His review explored options for simplifying and improving all aspects of the employment dispute resolution and recommending the repeal of the statutory dispute resolution procedures under the Employment Act 2002. So what did the Gibbons review in 2007 find? Well, firstly, it found that most employees experience problems in the workplace at one time or another. No great revelation there. But in 2007, around 42% of people who were surveyed for the review reported having had a problem at work within the previous 5 years. Whilst a great number of these work-based problems were resolved within the workplace, either informally or through the employer disciplinary and grievance procedures, the cost to the businesses and the individuals was very high, with many ending up in employment tribunals and indeed into employment appeal tribunals. The average cost to businesses back in 2007 for defending an employment tribunal claim was then estimated to be around £9,000. Well, you can double that now and add a bit more on top these days for a typical one-day hearing. And we won't even start to think about the cost of taking a failed ET to appeal. So the Gibbons review found that workplace disputes managed through the formal procedures incurred significant non-financial costs, including stress, health issues, and damaged employment relationships. And one of the key findings of that review was that when formally pursuing a disciplinary or grievance issue, the procedures carried an unnecessary, and this is words lifted directly from the report, it carried an unnecessarily high administrative burden for both employers and employees alike, and had the unintended negative consequences which far outweighed the benefits. So in essence, we're saying, look, you've got these formal procedures, but actually the administrative burden is extremely high. And as a result of these processes, which are supposed to be there to help you, actually the benefits are being eroded significantly. And in fact, many employers told the review that the dispute resolution procedures introduced to help them address 3Cs through the grievance route actually caused an increase in the number of claims and led to many outcomes such as high turnover of staff, increased sickness absence, and all at a cost to the business, its customers and its employees. So Michael Gibbons concluded that rather than encouraging early resolution to the 3Cs, the old grievance procedures led to the overuse of the formal process when dealing with problems which could quite easily have been resolved informally. This meant that problems were escalated, took up more time, money, and had a negative impact on the workforce, and by result, impacted on productivity, none of which was any good for UK PLC. So the review made a number of recommendations back in 2007, including the abolition of the statutory dismissal, disciplinary and grievance procedures, which some of you, if you've been around long enough, will recall. And these were replaced, when they were repealed, they were replaced by the voluntary guidelines based on the ACAS Code of Practice, with incentives for employers to comply and sanctions for those who did not make sufficient effort. The rationale for this was that earlier and better access to alternative dispute resolution procedures, combined with better quality advice for parties at an earlier stage, would enable better resolution of issues. So the promotion of earlier informal resolution to workplace issues meant the business could adopt a resolution approach without penalty. So is it legal? Yes, it is. The ACAS Code of Practice for managing disciplinary and grievance was revised itself in 2009, some 2 years after the Gibbons review. But disappointingly, it only included a couple of lines about taking steps to resolving matters informally, such as having a quiet word, but almost immediately follows this up by saying, but if that doesn't work, go formal. So it doesn't really engender and encourage employers to pursue an alternative dispute resolution as a primary. It's more just a kind of a bit of lip service. So it really rather felt that nothing much had changed. However, now, 15 years on, the resolution revolution has begun. So many businesses still think the ACAS Code of Practice is statutory and that they must still follow the formal route for resolving workplace disputes via disciplinary and grievance procedures, but it's not so. In 2011, the government endorsed the use of mediation and argued that, and I quote, "A significant growth in mediation of workplace disputes has the potential to lead to a major and dramatic shift in the culture of employment relations. So that was back in 2011. So if it was so good for business and endorsed by the government, why did not all organisations immediately jump on the opportunity of introducing mediation to workplace disputes? Because unfortunately, it's not the usual way that companies, and sadly many HR departments, have been taught to go. Fear of what if it doesn't work, or ultra cautious claim anxiety resulted in the formal grievance routes continuing to be the default for most businesses. Resolution solutions such as early intervention conversations and mediation did not feature and still don't feature in most businesses' performance management policies and procedures. But as we know, grievances don't truly resolve the workplace 3Cs, and worse, they can often escalate matters. So therefore, a grievance that is not resolved to the satisfaction of the individual raising it, or sometimes because they feel more aggrieved if it's found that there's no case to answer, is more likely to trigger a claim than less likely. For those raising a complaint or a concern or conflict, along with those who are the subject of them, and indeed all of those around the parties inside and outside the workplace, are often left with feelings and emotions and legacies of that process which are not productive, not supportive, and actually work against harmonisation back in the workplace. And the result of that, well, as we've said, drops in productivity. That was proven back in 2007, and that hasn't changed. Engagement drops off, increases in attrition, and in some cases, a profound negative impact on the customer-client experience. In May 2021, and some of you may have read this report already, it's been out a while now, but in May 2021, Professors Richard Saundry and Pete Irwin wrote a report for ACAS entitled Estimating the Cost of Workplace Conflict. Now, 2021, we were just coming out of the pandemic, so it was an interesting time to be looking at this sort of information, and the conclusion of their report was made some eyebrow-raising discoveries about the cost of managing workplace conflict. So before I do that, I'm just going to ask you to, I'm just going to run a quick poll, because Professors Saundry and Irwin discovered that there was a cost attributed to workplace conflict in 2021. What I'd like you to do is I'd just like you to vote on this poll as what you think that cost was. So I'm just opening up the poll now, if you would just like to vote for one of those. What do you think the estimated cost to workplace conflict in 2021 was? Give you another minute or two. Okay, well, for those of you who went for options 1 or 2, 642 million or 3.1 billion, actually incorrect. It was 28.5 billion. So 28.5 billion pounds lost as a direct consequence of workplace disputes within the UK. Now that is a staggering amount of money. And when I first read that, I read the first headline and thought that cannot possibly be right. And until you actually unpack that number and realize where that number is being driven from, you actually realize that, yes, even if you just take your own organization and start running some numbers, you will very quickly see how costs can spiral. So despite the 2007 Gibbons review and the recommendations to find more effective resolution approaches to the 3Cs, Professors Saundry and Irwin's research estimated that this cost for UK PLC as 28.5 billion was the equivalent of more than £1,000 for each employee in the workplace across the UK. Now, that is a huge loss of money. They found that close to 10 million people had experienced conflict at work, with just over half of those reporting that they had suffered stress, anxiety, and depression as a result. That led to around 900,000 people taking time off work, nearly 500,000 resigning, and more than 300,000 being dismissed, none of which is good for business. The report by Saundry and Irwin concluded really 3 strong messages, which appeared in the report and really has been kind of part of the driver for why I'm so passionate about resolution as an alternative to the grievance route. Firstly, they talk about conflict competence and saying that it is an essential ingredient in good management, which has positive impact on organisational effectiveness and performance. Secondly, they found that there was a critical time to intervene, and this was before conflict reached a formal workplace procedures, as this was the point when there was a greater likelihood of resignations, presenteeism and sickness absence being triggered if it wasn't addressed at the earlier point. And thirdly, while conflict could be bad and damaging to business and people, it could also be creative if it was constructive, and if challenges prevailing the ways of doing things would to give rise to opportunity to create fairer, more inclusive workplaces in the future as a result. So not all conflict is bad, because out of the conflict, positive outcomes can arise. Those were the types of workplaces people wanted to work in, those that were well managed, resolution focused, fair and inclusive. And by adopting a resolution approach, businesses are not denying or suppressing anybody's rights to raise a complaint or air a concern or speak about a conflict. What they are doing is providing a more constructive and inclusive means of supporting employees when the needs arise. So the resolution revolution has begun. So by replacing the standard grievance procedures with a more balanced alternative dispute resolution approach, businesses can take positive steps towards shifting the culture to one which is fairer, more inclusive, and seeks to establish positive working relationships. Workplace cultures that promote grievance as the only route to addressing workplace disputes are often negatively described, and can encourage employees taking up against each other. And I've certainly worked in environments where if a grievance was raised, a counter grievance may be raised, and so it went on. Conversely, if the workplace culture discourages employees from speaking up about the 3 C's that they're experiencing at work, they're creating a suppressive environment where employees are fearful to speak out about their experiences and either suffer in silence or leave. Grievance cultures are almost always and exclusively adversarial, retributive, and counterproductive. And by introducing a more human and humane approach to resolving the 3 C's at work, organisations are providing an alternative for which many employees is more relationship-centred, productive, and able to bring about lasting positive change. Some organisations have gone as far as to implement resolution approaches to both grievance and disciplinary, so eliminating both types of routes and introducing alternative methodology within those policies. However, for many that is a step too far too fast, but it's not out of reach. For many companies and organisations, introducing resolution approaches to manage what traditionally would have been pushed down a grievance or disciplinary route is just the first step, with most organisations focusing initially on the grievance end because those are the initial 3 C's. Now, I can hear brains buzzing with questions. When I first heard about this way back in 2010, I sat in a room at the Law Society and was completely blown away with the presentation, but immediately thought, well, how the heck am I going to make this work in my workplace for the company as a group HR director of the company that I worked for? And I asked myself the same questions that I think lots of people ask, how can we abandon the grievance route for a resolution one? And isn't this going to be incredibly complicated and difficult to do? And isn't it going to cost us a load of money? Well, if I can assure you as best I can, transitioning from the old grievance policy to a new resolution policy is not complex, but it does require planning and thought and effort. And yes, it will cost money to train people and equip people to be able to manage the processes through a different format. But when you counterbalance that cost against the cost of managing grievances, it's really small change. You may feel that you may not be ready to really completely do away with grievance, and that's okay. When I first transitioned one of my old companies from grievance to resolution, I retained grievance at the back as almost like an add-on at the back of my resolution policy. It wasn't the primary route for people to go to or go through to resolve workplace disputes, the conflicts, the concerns and the complaints, but it was still there if all else failed and if they were really, determined not to go down a resolution pathway. I have to say, in the years that I worked in that company, and then when I subsequently introduced it in my my new company, when I moved on from the first one, we didn't have any grievances. Once it became the established norm to seek out a resolution rather than pursue a grievance, that became the language of the business, and grievance just sort of faded away into obscurity. And I know that my moment of enlightenment came when the first employee contacted the HR department and said, I'd like to raise a request for resolution, please. And we all kind of looked at each other slightly open mouthed, thinking, goodness, this actually works. But can you just go back to the office and say, right, that's it, I'm tearing up the old grievance policy and replacing it with a resolution one? Well, you could. I wouldn't advise it, because really there has to be some planning and preparation for change, which involves not just getting the paperwork ready, but also convincing others to come with you on the journey. And for that, we have a blueprint. So let's just cover that off now. So to make the change, there are some steps that you need to take before you throw everything out and start to replace it with something new. Planning is the key to everything. With any change project, this one is no exception. So establishing your current landscape for grievances and the cost for your business to present a business case for change is going to be really important, because you are going to need to convince people, particularly the board or the exec, to understand what the current cost of managing grievances and complaints, conflicts in the workplace is versus the cost of implementing the change. If they can understand the cost, they can understand the benefit, there is a greater likelihood that you will get the financial support and backing. Creating a robust business plan for change, you're going to need to do some upfront data mining. So what you can measure, you can manage. It's an old adage, but it's still true. So you need to understand what your current 3Cs landscape looks like, not just the ones that are in flight, but also those that have been raised, those that have been managed in the past 12 months, those that didn't go forward formally and haven't perhaps been concluded. You can, if you measure them, calculating cost, time and impact. And by that, I mean working out costs based on, for example, the number of people typically involved in managing a grievance. I mean, there's at least a complainant and a subject, possibly an HR person, possibly someone to do an investigation or take the hearing, or perhaps even hear the appeal, maybe a couple of witnesses. If you can work out the rough cost using an average hourly cost that your payroll can support you with, you'll be able to very quickly take the data that you have and start to look at how that builds up a picture. That 28.5 billion that we talked about, I'm not suggesting that anybody's organization is going to reach that, but you will be quite, I think, incredulous at how much money it costs when you look at the time factor. The other thing that you can do is ask your employees what they believe your business culture is in related to how you as an organization manage those 3Cs. Do they feel positive about it? Do they feel that it's well managed? Do they feel that they're given a voice? Do they feel that it actually provides positive resolution? So capturing the anecdotal evidence is also a powerful source of information. The second step in preparing your people for resolution is engaging with those who may be resistant or wary of change. Training those who will be leading the resolution interventions, such as facilitated conversations or mediations, and promoting resolution as the company's preferred option for dispute resolution. Discussing the benefits of resolution over grievance with relevant groups and engaging them in the processes of change is really important, particularly if you have unions or employee representative groups or works councils, the board or management or employees. Gaining their interest, trust, and involving them in the process of development is really important. Helping those who may be wary of the change to see the benefit and perhaps become part of the solution, encouraging them to step forward to be trained as mediators or facilitators, or as indeed even as resolution advocates and champions to help spread the word in the workplace, is a positive way forward. Training people is really critical. As with everything, it's important if you're going to use your own team to mediate or facilitate resolution conversations, you have to train people. You can create communities of practice for those who are trained, so they stay consistent and connected and involved in the process of resolution. It's a bit like an advertising campaign. You have to continually promote and ensure that people understand how to access this system and to have faith and trust that the people who are enabling the system to operate know what they're doing. Ensure managers and others are trained and familiar with the policies that are often cited during a complaint, a concern, or a conflict, such as equality, diversity and inclusion, or bullying and harassment, or disciplinary. The better people understand the policies, the triggers that lead us down those sort of pathways of complaint, concern and conflict, the more effective people can be at managing any real or suspected issues much, much earlier. Often managers have an innate sense of understanding that something's not right within their team because there is a tension or a vibe that's going on. If they can take an earlier intervention, as the Saundry and Irwin report says, early intervention leads to better resolution and avoids the can being kicked down the road and escalating into a bigger problem. By all means, retain grievance as a backup, then ensure that those who are involved know how grievance works. What are the steps that need to be taken? At what point can you introduce a resolution approach during that grievance process? Now, in my previous companies, when at the very start of the introduction, when grievance was still something that people wanted to pursue because it's what they knew, we would always include a resolution, a mediation, or a facilitated conversation as part of the recommended outcomes. So even if they didn't opt to go down a resolution pathway at the get-go, it was still there as part of the recommended outcomes following any formal grievance. Knowledge and skill is critical for all aspects of people management, and simply just having a policy that people may or may not read is not enough. You do have to bring it to life. And if people are not yet ready to run mediation, if organizations are not yet ready to run mediation for themselves, then partner with a reputable facilitation or mediation provider to support the early stages of your resolution blueprint. Organizations, of course, like Kingswood Group, who would be more than happy to help. But there are others out there. But the best way to bring about, greater understanding is if you have people within your organization who are your resolution and mediation champions. Create your resolution policy. Replacing the grievance policy with a resolution policy. It sounds so simple, it's a language change, but actually the process steps are different, the management of the triggers are different, and you can, over time, once resolution becomes more established, explore with the relevant groups within your business whether the resolution approach actually is so effective now that just dropping grievance out of your resolution policy completely is a good thing to do, or whether you need to retain it there just as a backup. Marketing and promoting resolution options to everybody. One of the things I certainly found and formed part of my blueprint was taking this as an advertising campaign, making sure that everybody knew what resolution was, what it looked like, how they could access it, everything from having a facilitated conversation, a supported conversation between the person raising their concern and the person against whom they've raised that concern, through to formal mediation, capital M mediation, as I call it, which is a formal structured process. Helping people to understand how they can access that makes it easier, and then it becomes normalized, and it becomes how we do things around here, which is the cultural shift that we're really looking to achieve. And then, of course, obviously with everything, reporting the outcomes over a period of time to demonstrate the effectiveness of the approach. How many grievances did you have? How much time did it take? How much cost was attributed to it? And then how has that shifted over time through the alternative dispute resolution approach? Remember, having a resolution approach does not always work. It's not always the goal, the sort of, the silver bullet to harmonization. It takes trust, it takes belief, it takes engagement of all parties to make the process successful and effective. But once it becomes the way we do things around here, I can guarantee you the difference will be staggering. So there are a number of resources. These are all on the slides, which will be sent out to a number of resources, which I think people will find really useful to look at, because it's not just me who says this stuff. I'm a passionate advocate for resolution in the workplace, and I have been since 2010 when I first learned about it. But there are other organisations that also say, yeah, we get it, we understand this. And there are there's a large body of information out there for you to tap into. If you're a CIPD member, there's an article called Dealing with Bullying and Workplace Conflict. There's a paper on that by the CIPD. Of course, there's the Saundry and Irwin paper, the Estimating the Cost of Workplace Conflict. If you read nothing else, please do read that, because it's a really fascinating read. The government has a document called Solving Workplace Disputes, Mediation, Conciliation, Arbitration. Problems resolved through dialogue. I mean, it's not revolutionary, really, is it? You know, having a conversation with people and hearing their story and understanding the impact and giving them protected time to be able to talk about what's happening for them, and then coming to collectively agreed outcomes which bring about lasting change. It's got to be the way forward. NI Direct also has a document around workplace disputes, and HR Direct has conflict resolution, employment law solutions. So there is a number of resources there which you may find useful and interesting for your benefit. So the time is now just coming up to 1:10, and I've covered everything that I would like to cover. So I hope you found the webinar useful. If you would like at any point to talk with us at Kingswood Group further about the support for your business, or about how to make the transition from grievance to resolution, please do get in touch with us. No commitment, just an informal chat. We'd be more than happy to have that conversation with you. And, you know, we're going to open the floor up to some questions and answer session now. But if nothing else to take away from today, just resolve to have a great rest of the day, and vive la revolution.
Fantastic. Thank you, Gemma. Has anybody got any questions they want to ask Gemma while we're live on the webinar? You can either pop it in the chat box, or if you want to be brave and actually say it. Okay, so we've got a question from Michelle. How long did Gemma find it took to embed?
Good question. So I introduced, after I went to the Law Society and I heard the presentation, I went back with, you know, all kind of great ideas about how I could do it. I was with that company. I introduced it in, it was probably before it became the way we do things around here. It was probably just about a year from the initial thought to it being that's how we do it. Because within that time, I had to make a case for change to the board. I had to source training and get a pool of people trained up. So that organisation had 26 locations across the UK, and I needed to make sure that we had sufficient coverage with people who could facilitate and mediate in the face of a dispute initially, before we could get other people such as managers and supervisors skilled and trained to do the same thing. So yeah, that was about 12 months to formally embed. I was there for just about 2 years, and when I started at that company, the day that I joined, there were 21 in-flight grievances. Those were all closed out within 6 months of me starting, and then from the point of it going live, which was about 12 months in, so another 6 months on, to the point where I left, we didn't have a single grievance. And I took that to the next company because I thought, well, you know, why, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, do the same thing again. Was rather horrified to find I'd inherited quite a significant grievance culture in that company too. Double the number of in-flight grievances, 42 when I started. And that took around about the same time, about 12 months from start to finish. And it seems like a really long time, but actually there is a period of transition from people letting go of the security blanket of grievance and thinking that's the only way to do it, to actually having facilitated conversations and mediation as an alternative to grievance. Took around about 12 months, but that included training time, you know, promoting it, and obviously doing all the preliminary legwork.
Thanks, Gemma.
Thank you. Can I ask as well what the main hesitations when you first sort of started to raise it? What were the main kind of hesitations that you got on the pushback? Was it financial? Was it understanding what was required? What were the kind of key concerns that you got back?
Yeah, it was twofold really. From the board, it was about cost and risk. Board was cost and risk.
Yeah.
How much is it going to cost us to do this? Because, you know, hey, it doesn't cost us anything to have a grievance culture, you know, until I did the data research and presented it back to them. Yeah, building that business case, I can't stress how important it is to build, you know, even if you've only had one grievance, that grievance has a cost. If you're working in, you know, a normal organization where you may have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, perhaps as I found 21, 42 grievances, you know, if you take each one as being an average of 5 days and an average of 4 people involved, I mean, the cost just goes through the roof. So the board pushback was around cost, but that was very easily assuaged by presentation of data. Yes, it's going to cost us to train people, but the cost of managing as we are right now, it's a no-brainer. The risk was a factor for the board. You know, we're going to be more exposed. You know, what happens if we get to court and they go, oh my God, you know, you haven't let people have a grievance. No, what we've done is we've followed the ACAS. ACAS doesn't say, you know, you have to do this. What ACAS says you have to do is you have to give people the opportunity to raise a complaint, a concern, and address it in a way that follows the, you know, a kind of natural justice pathway. And that's what we're doing. And that's all the courts are looking for. They're looking for natural justice. You know, was this employee given the opportunity to raise a concern and have it dealt with in a human and a humane way, following the pathway of natural justice, which of course it does. From the staff groups, the people who, not that I wish to do anybody down, but the people I found most resistant were those who were union or employee representatives, because they seemed to feel that we were taking something away from people rather than adding to the portfolio of option. So that's why I really recommend involving and engaging those groups of people in the development of the solution, because they become your strongest advocates in the end, because they actually do then realize very quickly, because they are all, you know, really intelligent people who have all got the best interest of people, the employee base at heart. They see it very quickly and get it very quickly, that there's nothing being taken away. It's just adding to the pathways of resolving things that aren't right at work. Employees themselves were quite happy to let it go, because if you say to people, look, do you want to go down a grievance route, which is, you know, long, onerous, may not get the outcome that you're looking for, and it's going to take time, or we're going to spend a day together, you know, you, the other party, with a bit of preparation work, and we're going to thrash this out, and by the time we leave, we will have reached an outcome that everybody's signed up to. That, you know, they're not looking for more aggravation and sadness, they're looking for resolution. You know, when you say to people, you know, what do you need out of this process, they don't say, you know, they might say initially, I want my day in court, but you know what they want is they want to feel okay about coming to work. They want to feel safe, secure. They want to feel that life is, you know, they don't want to get that ball of anxiety whenever they think about going to work.
Thanks, Gemma. We've got a hand up by Sue. If Sue wants to jump on, unless it was an accident. No, might be an accident. And then we also have a question from Suzanne. What was the feedback?
Hello, sorry.
Sorry, got there.
I just realised I hadn't got my headphones pushed.
Oh, okay.
quite properly. It's not so much a question. I don't think it is anyway. It's more of a statement. I work in mental health, really, and a lot of the people that come to me are people that we're trying to support with workplace disputes, which tends to be kind of things around bullying, harassment, that kind of thing. They're usually at the stage where they feel that they've raised things informally, if you like, and haven't been heard, and it hasn't been dealt with. And you know, I tend to then be having the conversations with them that if they've already been down that route, that the only thing left for them seems to be to raise a grievance, because of what you were talking about before, that, you know, the ACAS, the perception that that's required by ACAS before it can then move to an external, you know, resolution through an employment tribunal. But what you seem to be saying is that's not necessarily the case, that it just needs to be shown that that the employee has had the opportunity to air their concerns and have those listened to. But I think the impression that I get, and I'm not from an HR background, that you know, that it very much does come down to training, that the organised, you know, a lot of the people that are talking to me, it feels like they've come from organisations where there aren't particularly there's either very little HR, or it you know, it's managers that are muddling along and not really knowing how to handle and deal with disputes, and so the employees don't feel heard, which has you know, serious impacts on people's mental health, which is why I put in the chat there about suicidal ideation, and that is a very real thing.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, I agree. And unfortunately, so this goes back to this point of that I made about, you know, it's not just something you can fall into. You can't just say, oh, we've got a resolution policy and away we go. You know, you know, resolution is just a word. It's how you go about finding those resolution solutions, which is why I talk about facilitated conversations and mediation, both of which, facilitated conversation is a kind of mediation with a small m, for want of a better expression. And it's still a process by which there is protected time for people to prepare, to have their voices heard and have their story heard, and you know, using a very simple approach of, you know, telling their story and sharing the impact of what has happened on them and to them with the other parties. Sometimes it's the first time the other parties have really had to listen in a space where they are not allowed to interject, they're not allowed to talk over the top of the other person. And if I can give an example, I was working on a mediation, a three-party mediation. I was party to, where there were three opposing political views. It was three political groups, three representatives of three political groups, and very entrenched positions. And the dispute had gone on for, you know, coming up for over a year, and it had become increasingly hostile. And you know, I think some criminalized behavior had started to creep in. I'm trying to be very cautious about the language I use, but certainly some property damage, threats, police were involved. So getting, you know, even just being able to get the three people into a room together with their prepared statements, with the time to prepare for themselves to have that conversation, and then to open up to the other parties in the room, who were all sitting there with arms folded, saying, you know, you can almost sense, you know, you can see the body language saying, you know, I'm right, they're wrong. But listening, seeing their reaction for the first time, to really hearing what impact the situation was having on the other parties, it helped them to see each other as human beings. It helped them to see them as people rather than positions or political parties. And I wouldn't say that they skipped out hand in hand through fields of daisies, but they went off and had a cup of tea together. Now, bearing in mind, you know, this had been a year in the making, and they wouldn't even be in the same building as each other before, let alone actually going off and sitting around the table and having a cup of tea. It just shows the power that can be brought about when people start to have conversations and are listened to, and that collectively actions and solutions are developed between the people who are most affected.
Yeah. Thank you.
Gemma, you might have kind of answered this already, but Suzanne asked, what was the feedback from your staff who used the resolution policy?
Really, I mean, of course, I would say that's really positive. Not at first, no. You know, I'm going to be honest. Not at first. There was a lot of suspicion. You know, it's like, well, you know, if I don't raise a grievance, am I going to be able to go to court later? You know, kind of questions. You know, I said, well, you don't have to raise a grievance to go to court. You know, anyone could go to court if they really wanted to, as long as they go down the ACAS route first. But there was a skepticism, you know, there was a reluctance to be, you know, I don't really want to be in the room with this person who's caused me all this misery. I don't want to be sitting down with my manager because they, you know, they're the person that have, you know, have been unkind to me, or this, you know, these two people have said these unkind things. And a lot of it was, you know, a lot of disputes are relationship breakdowns. They're driven out by personal conflict between parties, misunderstanding, miscommunications. But the fallout of that can very quickly enable people to move into this rather entrenched position of saying there's no point in trying anything else because it's not going to work, when they haven't actually tried anything else. So yes, there was an initial reluctance. You know, it was a voluntary process. We did say to people, you know, look, you don't have to agree to it. All parties have to sign up to it. And what goes on, it's confidential. It takes place in the room, but nothing is kept afterwards. No notes are kept. All that we do is we make a note that a mediation or a facilitated conversation has taken place. We keep a copy of the agreement if they give us permission to keep that. There is an agreement on how that agreement will be followed up if it starts to break down. Once people got over that and they start to trust you, trust is a really big culture change activity. You know, if you're in an organization where actually trust is eroded because the very nature of the business is to keep everybody combative and to follow retributive processes, it can take some time to kind of break that down. Once you start to get the trust, you know, people will seek out positive resolution. That's what they want. They don't want to be in a place where they are unhappy.
Thank you. And then we've got one more I can see at the moment, and just in time, we've got from Sophie, would you recommend that those conducting the resolution meeting should have completed a mediation course, more so the HR rep?
I would strongly advocate that people do get trained. You can do qualification courses, or you can just do training. ACAS do some training, but there are also other providers as well that do training and qualification courses in mediation. Do you need to be qualified as a mediator? It's debatable. For me, I think if you like to be able to say we have X number of qualified mediators, then that's a route. I did go down the qualification route in both my organisations, simply because I wanted to, you know, have a robust framework for practice, but also because it was really good for the people who became involved. And also, the HR community were only one part of that mediation pool or facilitation pool. The majority was made up of managers and other people in the organisation who weren't all at management level, because one of the most important factors with being a mediator or a facilitator is you leave your job title and your status at the door. You're not there to give your opinion or your the benefit of your sage words. You are there in service of the process for the people that are in the room. And that is a mindset shift. And that's something that when you go on a training program or a qualification program, they'll really help you to understand.
Right, thank you. That's all I can see on the chat, and there's no other hands up. So I think that's probably, if there's anybody else time to call it a wrap. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate the time and the contributions today. And I suppose it's just left for me to say, if there is anything else that you would like to talk about with regards to how to go about this. I did do a session just recently for some HR professionals where we talked about the introduction of a resolution policy and what that policy could look like. And if you would like further information or support or guidance around HR recruitment, because don't forget we are also recruitment specialists as well, then please do contact us for a free confidential discussion. Contact details are on the slide. Our website www.kingswoodgroup.org. You can contact us through there. And all that's left for me to say is thanks very much, and I hope you have a lovely rest of the day.
Amazing. Thanks, Gemma. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Take care now. Bye bye, everyone.